Welcome to Deep Impact Investing with Kimberly Griego-Kiel from Horizon Sustainable Financial Services. In this podcast, we talk about sustainable investing and how your portfolio reflects your values. Do your investments seek accountability from corporations that govern more and more of our society and even the lives we lead? Listen in as we explore the question, are you investing like you give a damn?
Hello and welcome to Deep Impact Investing with Kimberly Griego-Kiel and Johann Klaassen from Horizon's Sustainable Financial Services. Today we're going to be talking about global climate change and how it directly relates to the explosion of carbon energy reserves. That's what I've been told, and I'm pretty excited to hear what they have to say. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you?
I'm great.
I'm doing good too.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's nice to be with you again, Eric, and we're looking forward to having this conversation. It's a big conversation with a lot of our clients over the last several years. So there's a lot of information out there about carbon energy and divesting versus engaging in the conversation around carbon energy.
Nice. I'm ready to learn. Let's hit it.
Yeah.
Great. Global climate change is probably the biggest issue that our clients come to us asking how they can adjust their portfolio to help avoid. Right. Nobody wants to have the world burn.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I think, Johann, it's interesting because, I don't know, maybe a good 35% of our clients are divesting now from carbon energy. Is that about the number?
Could be. Yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it recently, but it's the number one biggest request that we're getting is to have portfolios that are completely divested or as close to completely divested as possible from carbon energy companies, coal companies, oil companies, natural gas.
Yeah, it's been a big issue, I would say, probably for the last 6 or 7 years.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's a big movement in terms of divestment, and there's always, of course, the engagement portion too.
Sure.
But divestment has been the move to process, I think.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years.
So our plan for the conversation here is to talk a little bit about what the problem actually is, and a little bit of the local impact that we're seeing here in New Mexico. To talk a little bit then about the couple of different approaches that we might take to how we address the problem within the context of our client portfolios. And then a little bit about what we actually are able to do and what we can do, and what we have been doing with and for our clients.
Yeah. So, Johann, you have a lot of these statistics, and I don't want to overwhelm people with statistics, but why don't you tell us what the problem is? Yeah.
So right now, I just looked this up this morning. As of June this year, June 2019, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is at 413.9 parts per million, almost 414. Most of us know or have heard that 350 parts per million is an upper bound that we shouldn't have.
We should
never have crossed that line, and we did a few years ago. And right now, we're almost 70 parts per million beyond that. So, 63, 64. This is a problem because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and it traps the heat in the atmosphere. And then there's feedback loops that feed that heat back out of the atmosphere into the oceans and onto the land, and it causes tremendous climate disruptions. One of the other things that's going on here in New Mexico, too, in particular, has to do with methane. Methane is another greenhouse gas, 86 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And here in New Mexico, in the Four Corners area, there's a huge plume of methane visible from space. Not in visible light, but using specialized cameras, they can actually see the methane plume over the Four Corners region. NASA estimates that this Four Corners methane hotspot is the largest open source of methane release in the United States, probably about 10%, give or take, probably more, I think, of the U.S. natural gas industry's total output.
Yeah, and of course, in New Mexico, our state budget is funded by oil and gas.
Right.
So this is a problem that is going to persist
Right.
here in this state.
We've actually seen just in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a big push from the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. They've been putting out some really interesting propaganda. Can I say that word?
Yeah, we can. Sure, it's our podcast.
They're making the claim that that there's a whole bunch of out-of-state activists coming in to from New York and San Francisco and other scary places like that to try and tell us good New Mexicans what we can and can't do with our oil and gas reserves. And at the same time, some of the things that they're pointing to as the influence of these out-of-state activists is things like op-eds by the local mayors of Aztec, New Mexico, and Durango, Colorado. I guess that counts as out-of-state, but folks who are directly impacted by the methane plume, by that hotspot. If that's those are the folks who are causing trouble. Well, I'm pleased to be.
I think we have to count ourselves in that. We've written a couple of op-eds as well. So
that's right.
I'm proud to be a troublemaker in that list.
Right. And last spring, we participated in a couple of presentation panels here in Santa Fe and down in Albuquerque, talking to local leaders and some state representatives and senators about the problem with methane and natural gas in New Mexico. So, we've been, I don't want to say on the front lines of this, but we've been participating in this kind of conversation in New Mexico for the last several years.
Yeah. So that's the problem. And that's the simplified explanation of the problem, because we could go seriously in depth, but we don't have
get that nerdy.
Right. We don't get that nerdy, and we can't show photographs, so we can't do that. But let's talk about approaches to solutions. And from our perspective in the financial piece of this, there are two approaches to the solution. There's divestment and there's engagement.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So divestment would be the basic idea is that, well, if you don't want to participate in the problem, if you don't want to be connected directly to the problem, you can sell all of your shares of whatever carbon energy companies might be in your portfolio. That's difficult to do in the context of a regular, straightforward, ordinary, non-sustainable, responsible impact investment portfolio, because just about every regular, ordinary mutual fund owns some shares of ExxonMobil and Chevron and the big coal companies. But within our subset of the industry, our sustainable impact investment industry, it's actually relatively easy to put together a divested portfolio that doesn't contain any of those carbon energy companies. So there's a couple of reasons that we might think that this was a fine idea, right? In addition to the straightforward moral argument of I don't want to be involved in that process, there's some financial arguments why we ought to be divested.
Right. Yeah. Of course, there's the financial piece of it, why we should. And part of that is the stranded assets piece, right?
Yeah.
And how do we explain that on a financial level, the stranded assets piece?
Well, the idea of stranded assets is that as regulations are developed around use and exploitation of carbon energy, whether that be through a carbon tax or some kind of limits on how much of the crud we can pull out of the ground, there's going to be some of the identified oil and gas deposits that are just not going to be able to be used. And so part of the valuation of those oil and gas companies is based on the stuff that they know about, that they own the rights to, that's still underground. So if they're not allowed to take that stuff out of the ground, then part of the valuation of their company is going to be lost, stranded. And so if we know that that's a probability and that that's a likelihood for those companies, then we probably ought not to own those companies because they're overvalued right now.
And their shares are going to drop. And
right.
So you buy it at $20 a share, and 10 years from now, it's going to be worth 10 or 5. Yeah, a lot less. Yeah. And then as we move along in this process, what we expect in the other financial piece is that there's going to be a lot more competition from alternative energy companies.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the expectation, right?
Yeah, and I think that those two go hand in hand too. That as regulation comes in and gets stronger, it's going to be easier, and it's going to be the competition is only going to get more intense, right? So that those alternative energy companies will be better and better positioned. Part of the conversation about the stranded assets idea here, though, leads us into the sort of second reason why we might think that we should divest from carbon energy companies. And that's that, well, as our friend Hunter Levins said in a podcast we did a couple months ago, the problems that carbon energy companies are running into with these regulations that are causing their assets to be stranded is just going to open the door for even more and better, stronger competition from alternative energy companies. So the alternative energy industries, solar and wind and hydroelectric and geothermal. Those kinds of energy sources, as as they get more mature, as those industries mature, they create more and more competition for carbon energy companies. And the stronger competition creates even more pressure on those carbon energy companies. And we believe, Hunter is pretty sure that it's going to be sometime in the next 5 to 10 years that carbon energy companies are going to go completely out of business, that they will have to go completely out of business because of the pressures from regulation and from competition from alternative energy.
Yeah, Hunter's projections are very short term. They will likely be a little longer than that, but Hunter's got some. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult projection to make, but it will certainly be less time than 50 or 100 years, I think. So
right, yeah, I think that 5 to 10 year time frame is, well, it would be optimistic from the alternative energy side of things, but it's certainly pessimistic from the carbon energy companies.
Absolutely,
side.
Yeah.
But sometimes these kinds of transitions, industrial transitions, go very quickly. So it could very well be that she's onto something there.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's got a very powerful message. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, when we look at the financial argument as well, the third and I think a very strong argument is public pressure and reputational risk for companies because, the public pressure we're seeing a lot of, absolutely, right, over the years. But, in terms of reputational risk, there's lawsuits, there's, all sorts of issues around that, and that costs companies money.
Well, and every time there's a spill, every time an oil rig blows up, then
pipeline fire,
right. Yeah. Or every time a pipeline is being pushed across native lands, or,
yes,
then those companies get, their names are in the paper or on the news in ways that aren't good for their share prices.
Yeah. So those are some of the essential financial arguments, I think. And then we come to the fiduciary argument, which for us as fiduciaries, I think is a fairly important piece. And that comes to the financial arguments are we should divest. The fiduciary arguments are we may.
Yeah,
divest.
Some folks might want to say, well, it would be, there are financial reasons maybe to go ahead and divest from these companies, but you shouldn't do it because that cuts out an important part of the marketplace. And then there are a whole bunch of these companies that you just can't invest in, and you have to be able to earn maximum profits according to some people's understandings of what it means to be a fiduciary, what it means to be responsible for other people's money. But we don't think that's true. Fiduciaries are required to act according to a prudent process, to invest money prudently, not for maximum profits necessarily. And we see that, the short to midterm portfolio returns, when we look back at recent history and we say, well, what would have happened to a portfolio if we hadn't owned any of these carbon energy stocks? We find the research is right there that there's no significant impact over significant, short to midterm timelines. And we know we can look at those long-term risks. When we look at the current CO2 concentrations and we say, okay, we have to keep we can only burn approximately 20% of the remaining carbon energy reserves without throwing the world into a complete environmental collapse. There's a long-term risk involved in owning carbon energy companies. So we believe that those couple of fiduciary arguments really do establish that we may and maybe must, from a fiduciary standpoint, exclude those companies.
Yeah. So these are the two, I think, important divestment reasons, the major financial arguments, the major fiduciary arguments that say divestment is an important option here.
Right.
Yeah.
It certainly needs to be something that we consider. On the other hand, some folks really stop at that divestment thing and idea and say that's what I want to do. That's what I feel I need to do. And there are some of the investment companies that we work with who provide the backbone of the carbon energy free, fossil fuel free portfolios that we provide. They are all on board for that.
Right.
They really think that that's the way to go.
Right.
There are some of our clients, though, who want to maintain ownership of the shares in carbon energy companies in order to continue to use the shareholder advocacy levers.
Absolutely.
And to engage with those companies.
And we've talked a lot about engagement and how important that is on other podcasts. And I've had a number of clients who say, well, I do like the idea of divestment, but I own a car.
Right.
And I buy gas. It's not an electric car. And so,
right. And we can't simply shut off all of our carbon energy sources or all of our carbon energy uses right now. We don't have the infrastructure in place to make to have alternative energy supply take all of that out of our system. Not all of us have electric. I don't have an electric car yet.
Right. Right.
But so for the moment, we just simply don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to make that clean energy transition immediately overnight.
Right. And storage of solar and energy and those types of things still need to be bumped up. I mean, they're not perfect. So
exactly.
Yeah. So those are,
So the carbon energy companies, even with Hunter Lovins's extraordinary prediction of they're going out of business in the next 5 years, that's 5 years worth of them in operation doing what they do, pulling the gunk out of the ground and refining it. If we don't remain engaged with those companies and keep them honest, keep them
moving in the right direction.
Keep them moving in the right direction, right? We can continue to stay engaged with those companies so that they do their extractive work in as clean a manner as is possible. And if we don't do that, if we don't remain engaged with those companies, then will they feel like they have license to do whatever the heck they want?
I think that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah. And so if we don't keep the pressure on them through our, one of the key levers that we have as owners of those assets, as owners of those companies, is to keep the pressure on those companies to make sure that they continue to operate as cleanly as possible while we think they prepare to shut themselves down effectively. And maybe they will use their so-called green initiatives as ways to try and keep themselves in business out past that 5-year, 10-year time frame. And maybe that'll work, but I still think that there is some power to be used in the shareholder advocacy.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I believe that shareholder engagement is a very powerful tool that we have.
Right.
And it makes a lot of progress, especially when you're making, for some of these companies, the business case for what they can do to make these positive changes in their practices.
Yeah, and we do see some of the carbon energy companies making claims, at least, that they're moving in the direction of being an energy company instead of just an oil company. And So we think maybe that some of them are actually getting the idea that they're going to have to stop exploiting those carbon energy resources at some point. And if they want to stay in business as an ongoing operation, we believe that they're going to need to change their emphasis entirely.
Yeah, it's been an interesting decade, I think, in terms of energy, and will continue to be so. Yeah.
So understanding that some of our clients want to take a divestment stand now and not wait for engagement to have its impact, we have put together some zero carbon energy portfolios for clients to help them. But a lot of our other portfolios and a lot of our other clients really still are interested in maintaining their small but meaningful holdings in some of those corporations so that we can continue that engagement. One of the things that we've heard from some of the companies that are continuing to hold on to those carbon energy corporations for engagement purposes is that they're starting to think about setting timelines and say, look, you guys, you carbon energy companies, this is our time frame. We have these time-related targets that we want you to hit this target by this date, and that as we go along, we're going to be divesting our shares because we can't maintain these investments in perpetuity. We have to take some actions, and so there's this kind of hybrid engage to divest that approach that's being used by some of our mutual fund and separately managed account partners. So I think that's another interesting approach to say, well, we're going to blend those two.
Yeah.
And some of the big energy companies really aren't interested in engaging anyway.
Very true. Very true.
So it's some of the biggest names aren't interested in engagement to begin with. So we're divesting from those. Some of the smaller companies are still interested in that engagement, are willing to partner with us and make some kinds of changes to the way they do business.
And those are the companies that we see the most progress with, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are the ones, therefore, that we see in our portfolios.
Right.
Because we know we can talk with them.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Johann, but one of my favorite questions that I get from clients, new clients specifically, when we're talking about, do you want to divest? Do you want to use the engagement portfolios? Is which one performs better? And my response to them is always, well, in our company's simple plan, Johann has the divestment portfolio and I have the engagement portfolio. And it really flip-flops back and forth.
Yeah, it has been.
Yeah. And so we can actually tell you that there really isn't going to be a lot of performance differentiation. And I find that kind of interesting. So I don't know about you, but
well, I find it fascinating that on the short term, quarter to quarter, month to month, it really goes back and forth. Over the longer term, all of those flip-floppings back and forth wash. So our portfolio performance, last time I looked at the end of the quarter here, was over the longer term almost exactly identical.
Yeah,
which is cool.
It is cool. Yeah. So which really shows that they're both important processes. Mm-hmm. And I tell clients, you should choose what's in your heart, and it's not about performance per se. It's really about what is most meaningful to you.
Right.
Yeah. So I think this has been a very interesting conversation, and I really hope that folks find it fascinating. And if they have questions, they can certainly reach us by calling us at 505-982-9661 or sending us an email, and either one of us can respond at any time to info@horizonssfs.com. We love to talk about this stuff, and we're happy to answer any questions anytime.
And we're happy to dive into the weeds and look at the numbers and get as nerdy as you like on this stuff.
Yeah, especially Johann.
And who doesn't love nerdy?
Oh,
Doing this?
Yeah.
Nerdy the new sexy, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This was great. And I love the information. I think that you made a really good point. A lot of people don't understand. Well, I don't know if it's that they don't understand, but they don't always differentiate between the purchase power with their wallet and then their investments. Like you had brought up the whole, well, I'd like to do this, but I have a car, and I have to use gasoline, and I have to, buy oil to do A, B, and C. But there's a big difference. You kind of have to have a car nowadays. And if you can't afford the electric car of your dreams, which my wife would love to get one at some point, but we're just not there yet, you have to settle, if you want to call it that, for a gasoline-powered vehicle.
Right.
But you don't have to settle when it comes to your investments, because there are a lot of options out there. So I love what you guys are doing, and I love that that's part of the message today. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, Eric. It's been fun. We do love to talk about this stuff.
Good stuff. All right. And thank you all for listening to the Deep Impact Investing Podcast with Kimberly Griego-Kiel and Johann Klaassen. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Kim and Johann come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Thanks again for listening today. For everyone at Horizon Sustainable Financial Services, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Deep Impact Investing Podcast, the sustainable, responsible impact investing podcast that shows you how to get your voice heard. It's time to start investing like you give a damn. To ask a question that we can answer on an upcoming podcast, email us at info@horizonssfs.com or join the conversation on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Horizons Sustainable Financial Services. Or give us a call at 505-982-9661. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. The companies we may speak about during our podcast are not recommendations for investment only. You and your financial advisor can determine what the right investments are for you and your situation. Horizon Sustainable Financial Services is a registered investment advisor, registered with the state of New Mexico and other jurisdictions were registered or exempted. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the host and or guest and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Horizon Sustainable Financial Services. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.